And just before we kick off, I've just been aware of a poll that's going on Twitter. Which of the three main candidates do you think will improve London, a London for all, was the question posed. And this poll is still going on. Zach Goldsmith, 14%. Sadiq Khan, 20%. George Galloway, 67%. Okay, so I'm going to hand over the mic now and we'll take your questions. If you could be as concise as possible, George can answer your questions straight away. Thank you.
Ajmal Sharif. George, excellent hearing from you again.
Thank you.
Just a question. I hope I'll be clapping, and we'll all be clapping when you become mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And do you see yourself joining the Labour Party again?
Okay. Are we doing it three at a time? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Mohammed Zubair, and I just wanted to mention to you, in your speech, you have mentioned about the cameras. We have record-breaking cameras in London than anywhere else in the world.
Gamble.
Yes, traffic cameras.
Cameras.
Yes, traffic cameras.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, George. What would you do about the rising problem of homelessness in London, throughout London, not just in this area?
Thank you very much. Let me deal with the... I've stopped smoking, so I'm on 60 of these gums a day. Please forgive me. Let me deal with the last point first. There's a housing crisis in London greater than we have ever faced, even at the end of the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, when we were bankrupt, we were building 300,000 council houses a year. Even under the Tories, we were building 200,000 houses a year. Last year in London, we built 81 council houses. 81. In a city where hundreds of thousands of people are on the waiting list, and where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, are living in substandard and overcrowded accommodation, and rising numbers have no accommodation at all. I'm giving to buy hats, beanies for people without houses. I'm giving to support soup kitchens and food banks for people who have nothing to eat in London in 2015, in a city that is dripping with gold. Unfortunately, only a tiny percentage of the population gets a share of that wealth. This is the capital city of the 6th largest economy in the world, and record and rising numbers of people are sleeping in the streets. And when they're not sleeping in the streets, they're sleeping on somebody's floor or somebody's sofa, if they're lucky, if there's not somebody already sleeping on the sofa, where people's children have no chance whatsoever of getting a house remotely in the area of their parents, where children, if we can call them that, in their late 30s are still living at home with their parents because they simply cannot afford the deposit and the rent, or the deposit and the mortgage, to buy or rent houses that are eye-wateringly expensive. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead a campaign to build 100,000 council houses in London. Not 81 like last year, but 100,000 council houses in London. Because I believe in council houses. I was brought up in one. I was born in a slum, in an attic. When I was 4 years, there was an outside toilet shared with 5 other families. The seat was always warm. And when I was 4 years old, nearly 5, I moved to a brand new council house. And I love council houses because you get to sack your landlord. Every 4 years in an election, you can remove your landlord if they haven't been doing a good enough job. Try removing your private landlord that are back in force, Rahmans, screwing the blood and tears out of people with ever higher rents, ever more insecure tenancies that they rip up at the first possible excuse and opportunity. There are 800,000 houses in London that haven't been bought as houses at all, but have been bought as safety deposit boxes for hot money coming from abroad, usually crooked money, that is parked in London in houses that nobody lives in or will ever live in. It's only an investment. So when these developers come to me, as they must, and say, we want to build yet another block of luxury flats in Harrow, but only some parts of Harrow, I'll say, if you want to build, then half of the houses have to be affordable rents. And by affordable, I mean half of the rent prevailing in the area. Now, to give you a yardstick to measure that against, the latest luxury development in London is at the Battersea Power Station, where just 8% of the houses are affordable houses, and by affordable, they mean 80% of the prevailing rent in the area. So I'll say, if you want to build, half of these houses must be affordable, rented houses. And by affordable, I mean half of the prevailing rent in the area. Now, somebody told me, just at our Christmas party on Friday night, I don't know why they were there with views like this, maybe to lobby me. They said, well, the developers won't develop. I said, well, I think they probably will, because Ken Livingstone had exactly the same policy. He didn't quite achieve it, but that was his policy. And the developers continued to develop. But if they won't, if they can't, if they won't, that's fine. We'll build some of our 100,000 council houses on that plot of land. We need to build up. There's no way that London can continue to exist with so few high-rise buildings. There's nothing wrong with high-rise buildings. There's only something wrong with them if you don't look after them. If you don't have a concierge, 24/7 concierge system, stopping people, trashing them, and bringing the value of them down to the point that you've got to knock them down. We need to incentivize people to build granny flats for their old mother. Instead of putting her into a granny farm, bring her into your own house, and we'll give you financial incentives to build more units. And the house that your granny was living in, or your old mother was living in, is thus freed for someone else to rent or to buy at a price that is falling. And I have powers of compulsory purchase. And I've announced that any house that is left empty for more than 1 year without good excuse, I will compulsorily purchase them and put them onto the market. So there are many things I can do on housing. The main thing I can do is lead. London needs a leader, not a reader like Sadiq Khan reading out sheets of paper that somebody else wrote. London needs a leader, not a reader, and I am that leader. The first question I greatly appreciated. I was a member of the Labour Party for 36 years. I joined it when I was 13 years old. My mother and father were members of the Labour Party all of their lives. I have never been in any other ideology other than Labourism. I'm not a communist or a Marxist or a Trotskyist or any other kind of ist, just a Labourist. And I was expelled by Tony Blair after 36 years of membership in a hearing that lasted 36 minutes. How's that for symmetry? Michael Foot was there to give evidence in my defense. Tony Benn was there to give evidence in my defense. And Jeremy Corbyn was there to give evidence in my defense. But they didn't care because Blair had already told them that they had to rid him of this turbulent priest. Why was I expelled? Because I was one of the leaders of the campaign against the war in Iraq, and how right have I turned out to be? If they'd listened to me, they'd listened to Mr. Ben, they'd listened to Mr. They'd listened to Mr. Corbyn, 1 million Iraqis would still be alive, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS would never have been heard of, never have been heard of in Iraq and Syria. And when I'm lectured by Hilary Benn, who voted for the war in Iraq, even though his father was our leader in the anti-war movement, who went around the country proselytizing for the invasion of Iraq, when I'm lectured by him about what we must do in the next war, and the next one, and the next one, I tell you, it's impossible for me to quietly accept it. So, will I ever end up in the Labour Party? Nobody can tell. Ken Livingstone defeated Labour to become the Mayor of London. I intend to defeat Labour to become the Mayor of London. What happens after that is another matter. Now, we do have more CCTV cameras in London than anywhere else on the earth. I'm not against them myself. I'm not one of these liberals who thinks the state should never see, should never hear. But I want to trust the state that is hearing and watching. I always used to say, my telephone has been tapped by the government since I was 18 years old. And I never complained about that. MI5, I've got somebody in this room listening to this speech. Good evening to you, by the way. Don't know if you'd like to take a bow. I have no problem with that. I'm an open book. What I stand for, what I say, I've always stood for, and I said it yesterday and I'll say it again tomorrow. If you like, I'll phone you up and tell you what I'm going to say. You don't have to send an officer along to hear it. But when Rupert Murdoch tapped my phone, I sued him and got a lot of money, thanks very much, for it. Because it's one thing to be observed by the country's security services. It's quite something different when you're being hacked by a grubby, dirty, sordid, tax-dodging, former Australian, former British, former American, God knows what he is now. It's very, very different indeed when you're being tapped for commercial purposes. And sometimes I wonder, first of all, is there film in all these CCTV cameras? There wasn't in the Stockwell Underground when John Charles was cruelly slain. And sometimes I wonder, when I hear that the film wasn't there, I wonder what the purpose of Big Brother really is in all these cameras. But I must tell you that London's traffic congestion problems are real. They are real and life-threatening, economy-threatening, societally threatening. And we won't be able to do away with parking wardens. We might be able to force them to be a bit nicer, a bit more flexible, but we won't be able to do away with them. But what we mustn't have is the use of parking legislation to generate revenue. That's not the proper way to generate revenue. And if it's killing local business, in Walthamstow where we were, for example, just a few weeks ago, they've introduced something called the Mini Holland scheme, which involves the closure of a huge number of roads for pedestrians and cyclists. But the small businesses that depend on cars and people jumping out of the car, nipping in, buying something, nipping out and taking off again, are being squeezed to death. This is madness. It's crazy to have these experiments when local people are not properly consulted and when local business is being choked to death. I mean, Sadiq Khan says he's going to be the most pro-business mayor in history. Well, I'm going to be the most pro-worker mayor in history. That's another of the big differences between us. But I'm in favor of small business. Small and medium-sized business is vital to the health of London. And we can't have parking restrictions choking these businesses to death. We have to be flexible. What's wrong with, say, you can park here, but only for 20 minutes, and you can park here entirely free for 20 minutes? What's wrong with that? Then you're allowing people to drop the husband or the wife off to nip into the business, make the order, bring it out, or you're allowing the driver to do it if they are alone. So I will look at the point that you made, but I can't promise you that there'll be fewer cameras because we're living in very difficult times in terms of the security. London is in a very, very grave degree of risk and peril. And once we've invaded Libya, trust me, it'll get even more dangerous.
Just thinking of the time, if we can make these the last 3 questions, please.
Okay.
Yeah, if you just put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
I'm not from the MI5, just to... in fact, I'm a minicab driver. I'm one of the founders of the United Private Hire Drivers group. And this is a question, but really more of an appeal for understanding, an appeal for your help. And we can't wait until May. We need your help now as well. I, like other minicab drivers, despite what you might hear, I'm fully insured. I've got an advanced CRB check, and I'm well capable of doing my job. But at the moment, TfL are running a consultation to change the private hire regulations, and it's very punitive. And this is where we need understanding. Let's start with TfL's board. You talk about diversity. 53% of this city comes from minority communities. Well, there's not one member minority representation on the board of TfL. Have a look at the website when you go home. Not one. And that the rot starts from the top and it moves down. In the private hire regulatory review, we have 3 board members of TfL that have said this about our ranks. One, who was going to be your opponent in this election, Michael Liebrich. He was pipped for the Tory nomination by Zach. He went on an enforcement mission, and he said he saw amongst our ranks potential sex attackers. Do you know what a potential sex attacker looks like? Because I don't. And I think it's an outrageous statement from a board member of our regulator, who we fund with our taxpayers and our license fees each year, to say that about us. Another board member, Steve Wright, who represents the major minicab owning firms, including Addison Lee, he said about us that we shouldn't be giving our money directly into foreign bank accounts because we're probably going to be supporting terrorism. I think this is outrageous coming from a TfL board member. I'm Irish, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember what this was like for us in the 80s and 90s. And to hear it again for Muslims in 2015 is absolutely outrageous. TfL in these private hire regulations are proposing that our details are passed to the Department of Work and Pensions because they can better identify us. Well, they've already identified us by licensing us, but they say they need to do this because we might be benefit cheats. This is outrageous regulatory overreach, and it's defamatory. They've also said that we're potential tax cheats as well. So we're sex attackers, we're terrorists, we're tax dodgers, we're benefit cheats. And not only this, they want to restrict us to work for one operator at a time. I earn £5 an hour. That's what the going rate is. Our guys are working 18, 19 hours a day because that's what they have to work in order to pay the rent on their vehicle or to the local minicab firm. At 4 o'clock this morning, I went up the Cromwell Road and there was an Addison Lee Galaxy wrecked. And I have no doubt why that happened. It happened from fatigue, no other reason. And I think it's just, I cannot believe, George, in 2015, 2016, we see 100,000 Londoners who are being treated this way with such disrespect. One other board member, let me tell you one other story and then I'll sit down. One other board member from TfL, Isabel Dedring. There was a story from the Stop Heathrow expansion group in Heathrow that drivers were defecating in gardens in Heathrow, around the Heathrow area. It never happened. There was no evidence, but it was a convenient story. And another way to, again, demonize a group of people, 100,000 harder working people earning very little money and have no employment rights whatsoever because we're allegedly self-employed. Isabel Dedring, our TfL board member, who we fund with our license fees and our taxpayers, went to the newspapers talking about us defecating in gardens in Heathrow. It is degrading, dehumanizing. It never happened. There's no proof. And it's just another way for TfL to absolutely demonize us. One more example. In the statement, in the private hire regulations, TfL said they need to monitor us. Not monitor us just for enforcement, but for, I quote, behavioral indiscretions. This kind of treatment, this disrespect from TfL, it needs to stop, George. It needs to stop not in May. It needs to stop now, and we need your help to do that. Will you help us?
Okay, so that was the first of 3 questions. If I could ask the next 2 questions, please, just to ask a question because we're just a push for time. Thank you.
Good evening. The buffoon, which is the current mayor of London, as you alluded to earlier on, went to Israel a few weeks ago for his trade mission. As the mayor of London, what would you do to boost the Palestinian cause and show that we are in solidarity with them over there?
Thank you. One more.
George, we discussed about this parking restrictions in the borough of Brent. In my opinion, I think the Brent is one of the worst borough where they have the restrictions. Now, I don't understand it that one street you go there 6 hours a day, parking restrictions. And the next street you go there is only about 3 hours a day. It doesn't make no sense at all. So do you think that you will do something about it to curb these restrictions or, just finish it off completely?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, parking restrictions are, of course, under the control of the London Borough of Harrow and Brent, and the mayor has no power on it, except, this relates to the second question also, except the power of the pulpit. I can say this in a church unequivocally. The mayor of London has a pulpit like no other. It is the largest direct election in Europe, with the exception of the President of France. No other leader in the whole of Europe is elected directly by more people than the Mayor of London. That's a hell of a mandate. It allows you to speak directly to the Prime Minister. It certainly allows you to speak directly, if not down, to the leader of boroughs and councillors. And I will use that power to the best of my ability. And I think you probably know that when I'm speaking, people tend to listen. If they don't, I just turn up the volume. And I don't need a microphone for that either. Akib, if he's our member of the GLA, will have a powerful role in relation to the town hall. But we will have to change town halls too. I personally think we've got too many town halls. I think we've got too many boroughs. We've got too many directors, deputy directors, assistant deputy directors, assistant deputy directors, and so on. I don't think that we need all of these. For me, I've always lived in South London or North London. Maybe I'll say I live in Northwest London. As it happens, I live literally on the border of Hammersmith and Fulham and Brent and Harrow. but I'm only 5 minutes away from Kensington and Chelsea. I don't place myself in any specific borough. I live in an area of London. And I believe that substantial cost savings can be made. We've got too many councillors and we've got too many council officials for all the good that they've been doing. But that's my personal point of view. I don't have power to bring it about. But as long as these boroughs exist, I promise you, I'll be using the bully pulpit on the housing issue, on traffic and traffic management issues with some power. I made clear earlier, I think, I have, since the summer of 1975, which is not yesterday, been involved in the Palestinian cause. I promised the refugees in Lebanon in 1977 that as long as God gives me breath, I will speak for them anywhere and everywhere. And that's a promise I have kept. And I don't think that there is anywhere a stronger voice for the Palestinian people anywhere in public life than me. I know Thank you. I think Netanyahu would probably say the same thing. I have no power to, and I don't intend to, stop any Israeli from coming to London, or buying in London, or investing in London. I have no intentions in that regards. But I will not lead a delegation to Tel Aviv. I will not visit Tel Aviv. If the mayor of Tel Aviv comes here, he won't be meeting me. He won't be entering the town hall, because we are against apartheid. We were against it in South Africa. I was myself, for a time, underground in apartheid South Africa, working for the liberation movement, for the African National Congress, then led by the great Nelson Mandela. And by the way, every person helping me in my mission, every house I slept in, every car I was driven in, every meal I ate, every rand that was put in my pocket came from Jewish members of the African National Congress. Some of the great heroes of the ANC were and are Jews. So Jews don't have to choose apartheid. They can be against apartheid. In South Africa, they were against apartheid, and we need them to be against apartheid in Israel too. Our friend from the private hire drivers union, with whom I'm already cooperating, made a powerful and heartfelt plea. And it's part of the big picture I tried to allude to earlier. Nobody in London can be allowed to work for £5 an hour. That's not even the national minimum wage. Still less is it the London living wage. And I've pledged that if your employer is paying less than the London living wage of £9.40 an hour, they will not be doing any business with us. They will not receive 1 penny piece from TfL or any of the mayoral departments. So this will act, I believe, as a tremendous upward pressure on wages. Because frankly, many of these companies will not want to lose the opportunity to tender for work from TfL and from the mayor, because there's far more profit to be made from doing such business. But our whole budget is going to be on the blockchain, which means that people will see in real time, online, every penny of the 18 billion expenditure. I mean every penny. So if I take, as I won't, Akib for dinner in a Chinese restaurant in Tooley Street, you're going to know that I'm there, that I used the mayor's credit card, that my guest was Akib, and that numbers 22 and 45 on the menu cost us 18 quid. And you're going to be able to say, why did you take him? And why did you take him to that restaurant? And you've been twice in that restaurant this week. Shouldn't you be spreading the love a little bit? All of that will be doable on the mayor's chain. And so nobody will get paid less than £9.40 an hour if they either work for me or they work for a company that's doing business with me. And that will be an upward pressure on wages of some significance. But the issue remains, with all respect to the very eloquent Irishman, being half an Irishman myself, I recognize an eloquent Irishman and I salute him. But for all the eloquence that he mustered, he missed my point. There are too many cab drivers in London. And just by licensing more and more and more of them, all you're actually doing is driving the wages down and down. And we can't have that. I believe in standards. I'm a trade unionist. I believe that we have to have floors on our income. And we have to seek always to be raising that floor. And you can't do that if you're undercutting and undercutting and under... The Asian people here know what I'm talking about. How many restaurants have got another restaurant next door to it and another one 2 doors down from it? How many shops have got an exact same shop next to it? That way lies ruin. It's called competition, but it's not rational competition. And neither is the current state of taxi licensing in London. It's not rational. And that's why wages are plummeting. Black cab drivers have lost 40% of their income. And they are taxpayers. They are insured. They have to pass all the tests. They are regularly inspected, flagged down and inspected. And they have to achieve certain standards. They have to have a certain grade of car and all the rest. And their wages have fallen by 40%. Why? Because TfL has licensed far too many vehicles, which is driving down wages for everybody, driving down, I believe, standards. Of course, I don't believe that your members are potential sex offenders, whatever that might mean, or potential tax dodgers. You'd be better parking in the City of London to look for potential tax dodgers. That would be a far more profitable way of raising revenue. I don't believe that. What I believe is we need a rational plan. And if I'm the mayor, I'll put one together about how many black cabs we can have, how many private hire cabs we can have. But Uber is a $50 billion American business headquartered in Amsterdam that don't pay any tax at all and even deny that they're a taxi company. We're just an app, they say. All we provide is an app for your phone, making everybody in here, you could all get an app. You could all be cab drivers. You might not know the way from here to Harlesden, but you can get an app and you can say you're a cab driver. You may be a rogue or a rascal, or you may give the app to your brother or your brother-in-law or your cousin or your neighbor, and he can drive about with your app. We can't have that. We have to maintain discipline and order and standards. Because I hear this all the time. Competition. Burn the red tape. Get rid of rules and regulations. I'll tell you where that ends. It ends in the disaster at Thorpe Park. Was it Thorpe Park recently? Alton Towers. Strike that from the record. It wasn't Thorpe Park. It was Alton Towers. That's where it ends. That's where burning the regulations ends. That's where tearing up health and safety ends. It ends with your kids shooting off the end of a fairground ride because it hasn't been properly maintained and there hasn't been the discipline applied to it. It's a big subject. I don't have time to go on longer. I'll just say this in closing. The gap between rich and poor in London today is wider than it was when Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. That's official. I myself obtained information as an answer to a parliamentary question. Now, under the last 8 years of Tory Boris Johnson, that gap has widened still further. If I'm the mayor, that gap will close. Thanks very much indeed for coming.